As humans, we are hardwired for language. From the moment of birth, we're listening to the voices around us. We pay close attention to those who are speaking. We listen to their words. We watch their facial expressions. We even pay attention to the tone of their voice. As newborns, we need to understand our new, strange, wonderful world. And we do this to a large extent by listening to others speak. Our parents bring us into the mix of communication by telling us stories, and that helps us connect from the voice to the printed word. When we're old enough, we go to school, and our teachers bring reading and writing into the mix. At that point, we have command of the 4 pillars of communication. But we don't develop these skills very wisely as we go through the modern school system. In fact, our education is pretty much out of sync with how we live and interact as humans. Once we have just a basic understanding of how to speak and how to listen, we move on to the reading and writing skills of spelling and grammar. And in doing so, we marginalize our ability to truly listen to other people. As students, it's rare when we're ever taught how to develop our own ideas and how to present them. And it's even more rare when we're taught how to listen to someone else's ideas, to truly understand what it is they're saying. But it wasn't always this way. If we go back some 600 years to a school such as Oxford University, we would discover that the only ones with books were the teachers. Printing presses didn't exist in England at the time, so students didn't even have their own copy to study. The only way they could learn was through listening, or maybe by copying somebody's notes in class. And maybe that was enough to graduate, but they wouldn't have understood very much. True learning only happened when students listened in class. Now, if we go back even further still, what served as a school was the campfire. That's where our ancestors learned to share their wisdom. It's where the stories of their humanity were passed on to future generations. These were the first days of storytelling and of story listening. Now, story listening may not be a term that you're familiar with, but in the days before writing was common, that's how we had to communicate. That's where our communion came from, our ability to tell and listen to stories. It's how we made sense of the world. It's how we connected to each other. In fact, our survival depended on our ability to understand what we were being told and to ask questions when we were unsure. Now, we've heard a lot about listening in recent years. In fact, there's a myriad of descriptors. It seems like every week there's a new article coming out talking about a new way to listen. And each of these does provide valuable insights on how we can better listen to each other, to be more attentive, to be more respectful, to be more empathetic. These are all things we should aspire to do when someone's speaking to us. But story listening is a little different. Story listening means moving beyond just the meaning of the words in the sentences. It means trying to understand the story that's being told to us by somebody else. Now, a common problem that all of us have when we're trying to listen is the fact that our brain is able to understand words about 3 times faster than most of us speak. That means we have a lot of excess brain cycles out there giving us an opportunity to daydream or even come up with our own story and look for an opportunity to interrupt and take control of the conversation. This happened to me recently when I was preparing for this talk. I would record myself on my phone and then play my talk back, trying to listen to my own story to see how I could improve it. And within 1 minute of listening, I stopped paying attention to myself. I was worried about what I was going to have for dinner. I was going to go walk on the beach. Did I put gas in my car? And I thought I was an interesting guy, but I guess not so much. But there's a hidden opportunity in having excess brain power. It gives us an opportunity to really stop and think about what's being said, to really hear the whole story, to appreciate the fact that the person speaking to us is really sharing an intimate part of themselves. It could be something very painful for them. It could be a part of their life's journey. We also have an opportunity when we're listening that well to ask questions, not questions that are based on judgment where we think we already know the answer, but questions that come from this very interesting place, from a profound sense of curiosity, from this heartfelt place of empathy, and most importantly, from a position of respect. Now, I got introduced to story listening after I left the corporate world, and I started coaching speakers, helping others tell their most impactful story. Now, a lot of these stories were about successes, scientific breakthroughs, very upbeat. But the stories that I learned the most from were those that came from hardship and redemption, and from struggle, and from transformation. These were the stories that really meant a lot to me. The point is that these are stories that we can listen to. These are stories that we can learn from. And in this learning process, we learn more about ourselves. We learn about ourselves when we listen to others. So there were 3 stories that really resonated with me from people that I've been working with. The first was a young woman from the Republic of Congo. She was just a baby when war forced her family to flee from their village. They spent 3 years on the run before finding a refugee camp. And that young woman and her family, they spent 13 years living in that refugee camp. They had to deal with a lack of food, inadequate medical care. There were also few opportunities for education for this young woman. After those 13 years, a relief organization finally brought her family back to the United States. She was in high school when I met her, getting ready for her graduation. She was going to be the first person in her family to graduate. I spent 3 months coaching a prison inmate. This was someone who had grown up on the rough streets of South Central Los Angeles. He was a really smart kid, could have been an honor student, but his world was surrounded by criminal activity. And in a strange twist, he knew by the age of 14 that he wanted to be a gangster. And so he joined one of the most notorious gangs in LA. His life of crime landed him in prison with a sentence of 160 years to life. Despite that, he was able to craft a new narrative for himself, a future free from prison gang violence. And in his own TEDx talk, he encouraged the audience not only to lead a better life, but to help others around them who were struggling to turn their life around. I teach a class in storytelling. And one evening, a student walked in, ready to talk about the sexual abuse that she had suffered, about the excessive drinking that she had to turn to hide the pain, and about the PTSD that she had to deal with because of her trauma. It wasn't easy for her to stand up in front of the class and speak those words. It took a lot of honesty and vulnerability. But she understood that her story could really help change women's lives, women who had gone through a similar experience. So story listening is not always an easy thing to do. It requires us to put aside our own assumptions, to move away from our own conclusions that we already think are there. But it's a process that can bring richness to our life, that can connect cultures. I know that in my case, this story listening has made me interact with people in a completely different fashion. Story listening is a way for us to connect at a level deeper than just understanding the words that are being spoken. And what I've found is that the true power of storytelling happens when we can share our story with others, and then we can become a part of someone else's story. And the true power of story listening lies in the fact that when we can hear someone else's story from a place of compassion and respect and honesty, that their story can become part of our own narrative. Our stories define who we've been and who we are today, but also who we aspire to be in the future. So should our paths cross, please tell me your story. I'll tell you mine, and we can do some story listening together. Thank you.